the CEO fired a single dad. Then he made one call. 5 minutes later, the CEO was fired instead. "You are fired. Leave your ID badge on the desk and get out of my company." The words echoed through the silent warehouse as every employee stopped working. Dozens of eyes turned toward Ethan Carter, a hardworking single father who had spent 8 years giving everything he had to the company. His uniform was stained with grease from loading trucks since sunrise, but the pain on his face came from something far heavier than exhaustion. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about his 8-year-old daughter waiting at home, depending on him for everything. Without another paycheck, he had no idea how he would pay the rent or buy her asthma medicine. As the CEO folded her arms with a cold expression, Ethan quietly removed his company badge. Instead of arguing or begging, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and made one calm phone call. 5 minutes later, everything inside that company changed forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than power and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Beyond Kindness for more emotional and inspiring stories. Everyone in the warehouse expected Ethan to explode with anger. Some thought he would beg for his job. Others expected him to threaten legal action. Instead, he simply nodded, thanked the workers who had stood beside him over the years, and slowly walked toward the parking lot. His old rusty pickup truck looked almost as tired as he did. Rain clouds gathered overhead as he stood beside it, staring at a faded photograph taped to the dashboard. It showed him smiling beside his daughter, Lily, on her first day of school. Ever since his wife passed away from cancer 4 years earlier, Ethan had worked every overtime shift he could find. He had missed birthdays, skipped vacations, and ignored his own health just to give Lily a stable life. Inside the warehouse, employees whispered among themselves. They all knew Ethan wasn't lazy. Whenever a machine broke, he stayed late to repair it. Whenever someone got sick, he covered their shift without complaining. He was the first to arrive every morning, and usually the last person to leave. Yet the company's new CEO, Victoria Hayes, believed numbers mattered more than people. After taking over the business 6 months earlier, she had fired dozens of loyal workers to impress investors with lower operating costs. Earlier that morning, a shipping delay had caused a major client to complain. Without asking questions or investigating the problem, Victoria blamed Ethan simply because he supervised the loading dock. She never discovered that the delay had actually been caused by a software failure in headquarters. Her decision was fast, public, and humiliating. Outside, Ethan dialed a number he had not called in years. He spoke only a few quiet words before ending the call. Then he leaned against his truck and waited. Inside the executive offices, Victoria proudly told her management team that removing emotional employees was necessary for success. She believed leadership meant showing no weakness. Her assistant even congratulated her for acting quickly. Exactly 5 minutes later, every phone in the executive office began ringing. The receptionist looked confused. The human resources director suddenly received an urgent email marked Priority 1. The company's legal department rushed toward the CEO's office. No one understood what was happening. Victoria opened the email expecting another client report. Instead, her confident smile disappeared. Her face turned pale. The message informed her that members of the company's board of directors were arriving immediately for an emergency meeting. Attendance was mandatory. The notice also stated that the complaint concerned her leadership decisions and recent employee terminations. She stared at the screen in disbelief. Across the parking lot, Ethan quietly watched several luxury black vehicles enter the company's front gate. He knew exactly why they were there. Years earlier, before his wife became ill, Ethan had helped build the company alongside its founder, Richard Lawson. Richard wasn't just his former employer. He had become one of Ethan's closest friends. When Richard retired because of poor health, he had remained chairman of the board while hiring Victoria as CEO. Before leaving, Richard had given Ethan one simple promise. If this company ever forgets the people who built it, call me. Ethan never imagined he would need to make that call. Today, he finally did. As the board members entered the building, nervous managers rushed through the hallways. Employees who had watched Ethan being fired only minutes earlier now looked through the warehouse windows, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding. Victoria walked into the boardroom with confidence, believing she could easily explain situations. She had no idea that her biggest mistake wasn't firing an employee. It was firing the one man who had helped build the company's heart. The boardroom, usually filled with confidence and polished presentations, had become painfully silent. Every executive sat stiffly in their chairs while the members of the board entered one by one. At the front walked Richard Lawson, the retired founder whose reputation had been built not only on business success, but on the way he treated people. Even after retirement, employees still spoke about him with admiration. Unlike the new leadership, Richard knew nearly every long-serving worker by name. Victoria stood to greet him with a practiced smile, but Richard walked past her without returning it. He placed a thin folder on the conference table and looked around the room with disappointment instead of anger. The silence that followed was far more uncomfortable than shouting could ever have been. Earlier that morning, Ethan's brief phone call had lasted less than 30 seconds. He had never asked for revenge. He simply explained what had happened and reminded Richard of the promise he had made years ago. Richard immediately requested security footage, internal emails, and the performance records of the employee who had just been dismissed. What he found disturbed him deeply. The reports showed that Ethan had received the highest performance ratings in the entire operations department for 6 consecutive years. He had never received a disciplinary warning. Customer feedback repeatedly praised his honesty and leadership. During several emergencies, he had personally stayed overnight to keep deliveries moving, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then another report appeared. The shipping delay that Victoria had blamed on Ethan had actually been caused by a failed software update approved by senior management. Ethan had tried to report the problem hours before the delay occurred, but his emails had gone unanswered. Richard slowly closed the folder. He looked directly at Victoria and asked one question that nobody in the room could answer. Did anyone investigate before destroying a loyal employee's livelihood? No one spoke. Human Resources admitted that they had been ordered to process the termination immediately, without conducting any review. Several department managers quietly admitted. They had warned Victoria that Ethan was innocent, but she refused to listen. The room grew heavier with every passing minute. Richard then requested another document. It listed every experienced employee who had resigned or been fired during Victoria's 6-month leadership. Productivity had fallen. Customer complaints had doubled. Employee turnover had reached the highest level in company history. Millions of dollars had been lost, not because workers failed the company, but because leadership had failed its people. Richard finally stood. He reminded everyone that companies are not built by impressive offices or expensive suits. They are built by ordinary people who arrive before sunrise, miss family dinners, and sacrifice their comfort so the business can succeed. Then he announced the board's unanimous decision. Victoria Hayes was removed as CEO, effective immediately. The same security officer who had escorted Ethan from the building only minutes earlier was now asked to escort Victoria out. As she walked through the warehouse carrying her belongings, employees watched in complete silence. No one celebrated, no one applauded. They simply realized how quickly power can disappear when it is used without compassion. Outside, Ethan had already started the engine of his old pickup. He had no idea the decision had already been made. His phone rang, It was Richard. Instead of offering revenge, Richard offered respect. He apologized personally for everything that had happened and asked Ethan to return. Not as a warehouse supervisor, but as director of operations, with a salary that would finally reflect everything he had given the company over the years. Ethan sat quietly behind the steering wheel. For a moment, he looked at Lily's picture taped to the dashboard. Tears slowly filled his eyes. He accepted the position, but only after making one request. He asked Richard to rehire every employee who had been unfairly dismissed under the previous leadership. He said, "No family should suffer because of someone else's